Okay, rolling.
So Neil, tell us a little bit about what you bring specifically, your expertise to the tours.
Well, I think, I mean, before I came here, I had an academic background, so, you know, I've got that kind of stuff in place, the knowledge and whatnot. But I think, and what, you know, struck me when I came here was that there's a personal dimension to all these things. And it's not only the difference between seeing the thing in reality and seeing it as a reproduction in a book, it's also getting some insight into the people who did it. An example that would come to mind would be the fresco cycle in Spoleto by Filippo Lippi. This is the very last thing that he did. He's a great Renaissance artist from the middle of the 15th century. And he came to Spoleto and 3/4 completed the fresco, and then he died. And of course there are interesting theories about how he died. He was fed poisoned figs according to one story, that he fell off the scaffolding according to another. Curiously, when you look at this fresco cycle, you see that he's signed it with a self-portrait. And in the self-portrait, he's making a characteristic Italian gesture with his hands, which is called le corna. And this is meant to ward off bad luck. And of course, the irony is that shortly after painting himself making that gesture, he died. A slightly happier ending to the story is that his adolescent son, Filippino Lippi, who was helping him on the project, is credited with having finished the cycle.
Now you see, Carol, this is exactly the type of thing, when you go on a tour with you two and with Neil, these stories that go so much into the depth, not just, you're just not looking at a piece of art, you're really hearing the story behind it. I mean, isn't that a really important part of what you're offering?
Neil brings in the current culture, the current Italian culture as well, as it relates to the Italian people now, and it's also how they live. The history and the art is theirs, that they feel they own it. Going to an opera performance, for example, the works that are sung, the Italians know so intimately. If it's done badly, they'll stand up and shout. And with the artworks, notably in Italy, there's hardly any ever graffiti on these glorious Renaissance and medieval fresco cycles. No graffiti at all. School children are always hoarded through the places. You know, they tramp through and they look, and they own the art, they respect it and they love it. They own the music, they expect it and they love it. They have very high expectations of art and of music.
Can I say also that it's an interesting thing driving around Italy in general. It's not just that there isn't graffiti on the fresco cycles, which would be tragic indeed. It's that the graffiti that you see is not the kind of vile and vulgar stuff that you get in many other countries. It's all about being in love. So even if it's damaging the wall that it's on or whatever,
and
it's
how much in love, and who they love, and how they will die.
Once you understand the language, of course, the thing becomes a little bit less disgraceful.
But isn't Italy all about love?
And food.
What's Italy about?
I've shuffled up to sort of lovers whispering. Italy is all about food. If you move up close and listen to lovers whispering in each other's ears, they're talking about recipes. And their grandmother's lunch.
That's very true. I can vouch for that. So your passion, both of you, is so evident after all of these years. What is it about Italy that you're hoping to share? What is it about your passion that you're hoping to share?
Our passion in Italy it changes as the place has. It's a very different place to what it was when we moved here 20 years ago. It's morphing and it's changing, and of course there's that sense in any society of trying to control the change and have a change for the better. When we first came, it was clearly and purely a monocultural, mono-religious place. Now it's not. Now that's changing inevitably, like the rest of the world. A performance that we're going to in Perugia, St. Peter's Basilica, is Eastern spiritual music played on the oud in the coming Sagra Musicale music festival next month. It's an attempt for Italians to take the best of other cultures and bring it into theirs.
And what about your passion, Neil?
Well, I've got a number of passions, and which I was aware of from a very early age. You know, ancient history and art were the initial ones, but coming to how it relates to Italy, I think the thing that really comes through to me is that in Italy they've got a couple of very important things right that other cultures don't. And these are the things to do with how people relate to each other. We noticed that with our children going to school, primary school, this kind of thing was just wonderful. The Italians are very, very good at getting on with each other. And it could be that this comes from several thousand years of having to live behind city walls all jammed in together for security, but for whatever reason they've got the human relations working well in a way, as I said, that many other cultures don't have.
Okay. Now, someone coming on one of your Living Italy tours, what can they expect? What are they going to find on one of your tours that they don't find anywhere else?
What I think people find when they travel with us is that we can enter doors, we can walk down back streets that they may not find or be prepared to find.
They would not find.
No. That we have relationships with the cooks here because we've been working with people so long, and they're our neighbours and they're our friends. When we turn up to a place to eat, not just ourselves, but the people with us are greeted with open arms and indulged. Italians are good at indulgence anyway, but we like to feel that we actually get special treatment in this area in particular.
Because you're actually giving them an intimate Italian experience. This isn't one of those tour bus, stop at the touristy restaurants. You're giving them, you're literally taking them into the homes of Italians.
Well, we used to joke that we do tours for the people who don't do tours. So
Sorry, can you say that again? Because I didn't think we got to talk of that.
we used to joke that we are the tour company that does tours for people who don't do tours.
We've never done a tour. We've got no idea what other people do. So it's hard to create a comparison. We live here and the people we work with are our friends and neighbours, and we go and visit them in the various towns, as well as having the glorious towns. We have close contact with the glorious people within those towns.
I remember early on when we were working, the place that when we're in Umbria we stay with, it's an agriturismo at Montefalco called Camiano Piccolo. I'd taken a little group to Spoleto, and at the end of the day we were coming back there, and we came in at the same time as another group of Australians who'd also been to Spoleto, and we were comparing impressions of the place. And the people who hadn't come on our tour had been to Spoleto. They hadn't been able to find anywhere to park. They'd gone up the hill, they'd gone down the hill. The restaurant that they thought was going to be good wasn't, and they came back and complained about the place. Said, what's there to see in Spoleto? Of course, our group, they didn't have to worry about parking. We knew the best restaurant to go to, and we saw a whole range of wonderful things because Spoleto is a seriously interesting place with a history that goes back to pre-Roman times. And of course we were able to get testimony to all this kind of thing.
And people at the end of the day actually say, we're going home now. When we're going back to the Agriturismo, which is a family-run place, and they have a gorgeous 4-course meal prepared for them there by the family, and that just unconsciously refer to it as, oh, it's time to go home.
Now, I can vouch for the fact, having been on a few of your tours, that your knowledge and expertise is really quite remarkable, Neil, and you actually have a way of taking people into history, wherever they are, into that time, back to that time. I mean, that's a very unusual ability, talent to have. You must hear that from people that take your tours. They must be very appreciative of that.
I do, and thank you, because that's really what I'm trying to do. I think, obviously as a base, you have to have knowledge, you have to have the academic structure and all the rest of it. But what a lot of people with a great deal of knowledge fail to do is connect the various stories. And in fact, I think it's making a story of things that's a way of bringing it to people that you can, in a way that you can remember. And I suppose I've worked at that, partly because I think I remember things better if there is a story there. So I'm initially making stories for myself, And of course, once you've made a story for yourself, you're connecting disparate things from different periods of history. If you present it like that to people, they get a sense of the bigger picture, because you can have all the detail you like, but if you haven't got a structure to hang it on, it's not going to stick.
Okay, so your tours, I mean, they're enlightening, educational, entertaining. How would you, in your words, describe your tours, Carol?
It's important, I think, in looking at anything in Italy in particular for us, that you're not looking at art as a separate entity, or food as a separate entity, or wine, or the personality of the people, or opera, because they're all intertwined. They all belong together and have repercussion and effect on each other. The characters in opera, there's a syndrome in Italy where people are comfortable if you're staring at them. They want to be stared at, whereas in our culture we're allergic to that. We get offended by that. Italians are natural performers. The passeggiata, in the early evening, where people deliberately parade up and down the street in order to be looked at. I was watching a woman on the telephone, on her mobile phone, standing outside the pharmacy the other day. She was saying nothing. She was sort of saying but, if, and almost, maybe, and, she was actually saying nothing. But her gesture was so precise, and it was conducting. It's as though as though music was their invention, as though performance is their invention. And costume, here in summer in particularly, the evening local festivals, where men dress up in tights and chainmail, it's perfect. It so suits them. It's almost as though it's awkward for them being pushed into the modern world, except they have their cigarettes and mobile phones. But.
And Neil, how would you describe your tours?
Well, I think the same kind of description that Carol's been giving. Just to go back to a point that she was making a moment ago, there's a lovely book that was written in the 1960s by an Italian called Luigi Barzini. It's called The Italians, and it's written in English. And he was trying to explain, succeeding, I think, in explaining Italy to his American friends, because he grew up in America. And one of the basic points that he makes is exactly what Carol was saying, that Italians are performers, and they know that they're performing at a very early age, so that when you look at babies beautifully dressed up being presented by their mothers, the baby already is playing the role of a baby. Now, this has got a funny side, a light side to it, but it's also got a more serious side to it, because when you think about it, the arts that the Italians have distinguished themselves in, the things that they have made real attainments in, is the organisation of appearance. Now, this can be fashion, this can be design, but it can also be painting and sculpture and things like that, so at the very highest level. So I think the unique thing about Italy is that they have a grip on the organisation of appearances, both in works of art but also their own selves, that is really quite extraordinary. And when you're here, you can just sit back and watch and enjoy it.
Okay. And what are you hoping that someone coming on your tour would take back home with them?
We've had people say that they've had life-changing experiences, and it depends on the person. Different people get different things out of it. We've had one lady who came back and decided to spend a year studying Santa Rita in Montefalco as part of an art thesis in Australia. So we've had. No, the question's too hard.
Okay.
No, I think that what you would like our people to take back.
Can we say from the beginning, from the top, Neil?
Yeah.
I would say what we would like is that they
People
take
to
back
tell
a
what-
really nice and varied set of excellent memories, together with the beginnings of an understanding of a period, a very important period of European history, because. It's another thing that Italy is central to. It's been central to the story of European civilization for a very long time. and that after the Dark Ages, when we first get the beginnings of the Middle Ages, it is in Italy that city life is reinvented, and a number of things, including the forms of government that we have today, are experimented for the first time since ancient times in the city-states of central Italy.
Okay, and can you just repeat the very beginning when you say what I hope people will take away?
Well, what I would hope people would take away is a set of delightful and instructive memories.
Okay, perfect. And now let's talk a little bit about your specific tours. So, and tell me if I don't have the ones. First of all, maybe ones you want to highlight. Is Living Umbria one that you'd like to?
Okay, so we started with Living Umbria, which is essentially visiting the local towns and villages. We've got a range of, I would say, 15 important towns within the radius of an hour from here, all containing important fresco cycles and gorgeous restaurants and lovely people. A myriad of villages and, you know, some major cities as well, like Perugia and Assisi and Spoleto that we can visit. So it's a question of choosing, it's a question of selecting from amongst that, and depending on what's happening in the towns at the time. If there are local festivals, we visit those. If there are sagre, which are feasts involving the food, then we visit those. And of course the performances.
Okay. And what's one of the highlights of the Living Umbria tour, Neil?
Highlights, that's too hard.
The layers of history.
Yeah, I perhaps I should say that I came to Umbria almost by accident. I was at the time living in Berlin, and I was visiting Italy, and through an agency in Berlin that specialised in holidays for Germans and house rentals, I found the place, my first house in Italy, and so that's my reason for being in Umbria. And I didn't quite understand at the time what a good choice it was. But having moved here, of course, you understand that Umbria is central. It's the very middle of Italy. And from this central location, we can radiate out. So Living Umbria was at the beginning exactly that. We were just finding the places, the wonderful places that were a short drive from our own home. Having done that for a number of years, of course, we had people coming to us and saying, well, look, you know, we're not sure that we want to come back to Umbria 2 and 3 times, but if you were to take us to somewhere else, we'd be delighted. So that was the beginning of our Sicily tour, and also the Mysteries of the Mezzogiorno.
But we have high standards, so we had to...
Can you pick that up again? Do we have high standards?
We have high standards in terms of what our experiences have been in Umbria, so it's been a challenge to extend those to Puglia and Basilicata and to Sicily, to find places that where we have the same quality of food and experience, places that represent the place we're in, not places that are trying to be a comfortable hotel and have a standard presentation. It's difficult because the places we stay never have matching rooms. The rooms are all completely different, but they're character filled and they're of the area and they're of the place, and they represent the people who have put that together. In Matera we stay in caves. In Umbria we stay in an agriturismo, a country run farmhouse surrounded by olive trees and vineyards, because that's what Umbria is. In Matera people lived in caves. And so there are places that have been, there are renovated caves, of course, but they're renovated to look like hotels. We've found caves that have been renovated to look like caves.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And so you're basically taking all the worry away from your guests, aren't you? I mean, literally everything is organized for them.
Well, it's the selection of places. We've done a lot of moving around Italy ourselves, and we've stayed in some places that are disastrous. In Sicily, when I was first asked to run a program there, I thought I'd better go and research this, because I know I need to find somewhere that's like the lovely family that we stay with in Umbria. So I searched the web. I found places that sounded gorgeous with the big, fireplace, family-run kitchen, surrounded by olive trees. And when I arrived, it was a nightmare. It was, there was no fireplace, there was no friendly, happy family. There were a pack of dogs chained up outside my room, barking all night. You need to be there, you need to actually know. So we've run through that selection process, basically.
And so you've made it pretty much.
I think so, yeah. I mean, as Carol said, we've had some interesting times at the beginning, but we've sort of sorted it out so that we've kept up our high standards. So that I think you guests who come on our tours in the south of Italy and in Sicily will get something really quite like the very the handmade tours that we do in Umbria.
And Umbrian Appetites was one of
So
our...
we're going to get you to pick up on that? And Umbrian Appetites?
Umbrian Appetites was one of also the basis of our selection process in how we would do things here. We, of course, went to restaurants and we had cooking classes in restaurants, and we went to various cantina or cellars and had wine tastings. But we had a lot of people come to us and just say, well, for example, I grow saffron. Do you think anyone might be interested in picking saffron? And of course our jaw drops. They're experiences that we had no idea about until people bring them to us. Truffle hunting. We had the truffle hunter say, do you think people might be interested in wandering around a forest with my dogs and myself and, digging up truffles? It's not interesting to them because they do it all the time, but they're so keen to find work for their families and for themselves that they present these ideas to us, which of course are stunning. And of course we want to go and pick saffron, and of course we want to go truffle hunting.
That's great, I love that. So if you could expand on that and give just a little list of things that people can do on these tours. We can, if on one of our tours you can go truffle hunting, you can pick saffron, you can just sort of what I would call a laundry list of a few things that are very unique. So what are some of the unique things you can do on your tours?
You can eat very good pasta in Umbria, but you can also go and visit someone's home on the way and watch them actually making the pasta, which most of our neighbours here in the village still do. And there's that sense of Umbria changing as well. When we first moved here, we had people with animals in the stable just outside the door here, and slaughtering pigs on the veranda just across the other side of the piazza. Those things are changing, but they are in a sense still the things that we seek out. Cheese making traditions, the truffle hunting traditions, the food making tradition. When you go to lunch or a meal at a person's place here, you're not just thanking the woman for preparing the meal, you're thanking the husband for catching the small birds or making the oil or preparing the tomato paste, growing the tomatoes. Nobody eats food that doesn't come out of their own garden in this place. You can't trust what other people do with food. You have to start from the ground.
It's also worth mentioning Montefalco.
One second, and again, Neil?
It's also, I think, worth mentioning Montefalco in this context because there is a grape that's, in a sense, made the fortune of Montefalco in recent years, but once it grew only within the walls of the town, and the people made this altar wine, Sagrantino Passito is the name of it, which is absolutely extraordinary, and the techniques, the methods of making it are really quite particular, and they include not doing it when there's a certain wind blowing from the north, or pulling the vats out into the snow in February to stop the fermentation process. Things like this that you would have no idea about, if you're coming from an ordinary wine-making perspective. So somewhere like Montefalco, we can take people to wineries and they explain this and they show us how they make this extraordinary wine.
We take people to a coal maker. There was an ancient tradition of coal making, which is now sold to restaurants for high quality barbecue coals and also for medicinal carbon, for medicinal purposes. But the grandfather of the coal maker is still there, and they build this mound over 3 or 4 days and then light it and burn it over 2 days. So we go back in stages and sort of he generally has it constructed when we get there, but we'll go back and watch it burning slowly with no air or controlled air. And his grandfather used to take the resulting carbon to Foligno on the back of a donkey. These people are still there, and then his wife will cook lunch and they'll tell us more of the story.
That sounds amazing. So tell me a little bit about your Mysteries of the Mezzogiorno tour.
The Mysteries of the Mezzogiorno, the south of Italy is known as the Mezzogiorno. It's an enormous area. We begin in Puglia. We begin with the sea. I think Puglia is about the sea. It's also about those fabulous little hobbit honeycomb homes called trulli that people live in. It's about the people there as much, and the food.
And it's about those olive trees. They have millions and millions of olive trees there that are the biggest and oldest olive trees that you're ever likely to see, some of which have been carbon dated to 2,500 years, which is not much after where we think the olive, when we think the olive was first domesticated.
Amazing. And what about some art treasure that you can share on from that tour?
Puglia doesn't have the fresco cycles that the Umbrian, Tuscany and places like that have. What it does have is extraordinary architectural gems, one of which would have to be Castel del Monte, which is the for want of a better description, the hunting lodge castle built by Frederick II in the early part of the 13th century.
Now, just to interrupt you for a second, if you can refer to some artistic treasure from the Abruzzo period, because you would have footage of it from us, what's something that they can see in Abruzzo that you can share of art, history or treasures there?
Well, we travel through Puglia, through Basilicata, then to Campania, and then we finish in Abruzzo, where again we enter the area of some extraordinary examples of ancient art.
Abruzzo again doesn't have the gems, doesn't have but it's got a whole lot of what you might describe as vernacular that is absolutely fabulous. The most extraordinary castle that I've ever seen, Calascio, for example, we visit that, and then we have a wonderful lunch in the little village just beneath it. Or an
Sorry, but I just know you're going to have trouble cutting this. Can you start saying, in Abruzzo, there is the most extraordinary castle that I've ever seen?
Okay, in Abruzzo there is the most extraordinary castle that I've ever been to. The castle of Calascio, not far from the very high mountains of Gran Sasso.
On a mountain, as castle should be.
Yeah, and an octagonal church nearby, which has to have the best view from any church that we've ever been to.
Those early frescoes in Bominaco?
In Bominaco, in another town not far from Novelli, which is considered the centre of the.
You start again.
What's the saffron? The saffron, yeah. So, not far from Novelli, which is considered the centre of the Abruzzo's saffron industry, is a town called Bominaco, which just about nobody's ever heard of, tucked away behind some hills. If you manage to get there, you're treated to a really quite extraordinary sight, an oratorio from the frescoes in it. It's the most completely frescoed church interior you're likely to see in the whole of the Abruzzo.
Can I just say that if you do get there, you're not necessarily treated to it because you can't get in.
Okay, you have to make.
We can get in. You have to make several phone calls,
You have to make
several
several
days
phone calls.
ahead,
Yeah.
and make several random arrangements, which may or may not come to fruition.
There's a really good point. So you're actually able, and maybe you can tell me this because you're not going to hear my voice, you're able to take people into places they would never be able to go into on their own.
Yeah, so in the church in Bominaco, for example, we're able to take people in there because we have the phone number of the lady who has the key.
So you're able to take people to places that they wouldn't be able to get to?
Yeah, they will.
They
but
may or
they
may not.
may be able to get, but I think the most important point is that nobody's ever heard of these places. You know, you can have tourists travelling through these areas. In fact, it's worth saying that a whole lot of people have never heard of the Abruzzo. The Abruzzo is it's the centre of Italy and one of the most extraordinary, I think, wonderful areas. And yet,
And for us, a lot like Umbria was 20 years ago when we came here, when we were the only foreigners.
it's also why there's a wildness
There's
about.
1 second here, and going back and forth, so I'm just gonna keep it on the 2 shot, and that'll do it.
Yeah, you two can
Thanks.
talk
Yeah.
together, that's good. Sorry, Neil, what were you saying?
What were we?
Oh, the
so-
Abruzzo.
The Abruzzo.
No, don't move your chair.
that where were we?
The frescoes in Bormina.
You're just
No,
saying
we
how
weren't. We've
Abruzzo
moved on from there.
is an area that not a lot of people don't know.
Not many people know it, and there's a wildness to it. Well, Carol was saying a moment ago that it's like Umbria was 25 years ago when we first came here. We, at the beginning of the Living Italy adventure for us, were advised not to mention Umbria because nobody had heard of it, but to say that the tours were in Tuscany.
And tell people when they got here.
Only tell people when they got here. Well, Abruzzo, in a way, is like that. It's like Umbria of 20, 30, even 30 years ago. What it's got that Umbria doesn't have, though, is a kind of a wildness. It's got very big mountains, Gran Sasso's up at 3,000 metres, and it's got forests that still have wolves and bears in it, for example. So it makes Umbria seem a little bit domesticated. So there's a wildness and a kind of a frontier quality to Abruzzo which nowhere else in Italy has. And
I think the challenge for us is that we have to talk people into going to places that they wouldn't think of going to or wouldn't consider going to. And then when they're there, it's up to us to show them why they need to be there, why they needed to see that.
Yeah, that's great.
we've also had, I think, problems, perhaps too big a word, but with the itinerary, to get people to come, you have to put a whole lot of things on the itinerary, but often that can be too much. And when you get to a place like the places we take people to, there's a kind of a richness of the experience there which makes just the little one-word description in the itinerary, you wouldn't imagine it for a moment that there is this wealth of experience that you have access to.
See, that's excellent. All this last part, really, really like.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's really good.
Any other specific tour you want to bring up here to promote coming up that you want to talk about?
The music itineraries.
Okay, let's talk about that. Tell me about your music itineraries.
Basically, when people travel with us, I acknowledge that they are subject to our tastes and preferences because we're doing this because these are things that we want to see, places we want to visit, and in a way that we want to see them. Neil's training is in fine arts. My training is in music at the Conservatorium of New South Wales. And I'm not performing anymore, but I'm still deeply immersed in music. There are some excellent music festivals on here, and I used not to include it in the itinerary. I used to just say to people humbly, well, I know that we've been busy visiting Roman ruins all day, but there is an excellent performance on this evening by Emma Kirkby of early music in Spoleto, and I'm going, and if you would like to come. And ultimately people were saying to me, well, this is madness. Why don't you just simply do a music itinerary and call this a music itinerary? So now we do. Umbria is full of excellent, evocative venues. Montefalco, 15 minutes from here, with a population of 6,000, has 26 churches. Every single one of them is a potential venue.
And 6 saints.
And 6 saints. So these places as performance venues are priceless for us, and international artists love being in Italy and performing in Italy. As I say, it's the ultimate test for them. The Italians own these works. When they come here, they know whether they're received well. We have venues like the Basilica in Assisi with the Giotto fresco cycles, and we've had the Tallis Scholars performing last year in an ethereal work by Arvo Pärt. The experiences are edging on spiritual, even if you're not prone to those tendencies.
Excellent. All this last part I would use in the last 3 or 4 questions back. Very good. Okay. Any other itineraries you want to mention, or? Do you
I suppose I'd like to say
Sicily.
a couple of times we've done Etruscan tours, and
Yeah,
sure.
but it's not on there at the moment.
No?
It's hard, no, unless we do that. Oh, I don't know. Yes, okay,
Do
sure.
you want to tease that you might do this?
Yeah.
As something that you.
Yeah, okay. We've thought from time to time that, we might actually slow down on this, but instead we keep having more ideas and we keep finding more places and we keep indulging ourselves in our own fascinations. Neil's love and thorough intrigue with the Etruscan culture, for example, is one of those.
Yeah, I think I must have been aware of the Etruscans from a very early age, and there was always this mystery. So when you come to a place like Italy, and you realise that the people who are living here are actually the descendants of the ancient Etruscans, it's really something. And of course, in recent years, there have been some very interesting new developments in tracking down just who the Etruscans are or were, in particular with the use of DNA mapping. And it's this that gives us some confidence in saying that the Etruscans are still here.
And so you might be including an itinerary?
We have done an Etruscan itinerary. We've run it through twice, and we may yet put it on another time.
Okay. Now I want to know, we're sort of wrapping up here. Anything else you want to mention in terms of itineraries first, or you? I don't know if I've missed any important one.
Music, art,
Living Umbria.
art cities. I think we should do